Welcome to your friendly neighborhood historian, where we discuss just enough history to inform, intrigue, and entertain. I'm Bill Petro. The history of Star Trek. On September 8th, 1966, Star Trek premiered on NBC TV. It is my favorite television show. I was glued to the TV for the first episode and everyone after that. It had a significant influence on my life and on my choice of a career in technology. The show presented an optimistic vision of the future, where the challenges of poverty and hunger had already been addressed. However, many other issues relevant to the 1960s were depicted as still being wrestled with centuries into the future. The original series showed a utopian view of science fiction that differed somewhat from the current dystopian science fiction TV and movies we see today. The Star Trek franchise continues to create new shows, as I'll describe below. Star Trek did not just envision the future, it imagined it and helped drive it. It inspired generations of scientists, engineers, and technologists around the world. Many scientists today will say that Star Trek influenced the projects they're working on, especially in space exploration, physics, optics, electronics, computing, and communications, as I'll recount at the end of this podcast. Though the original show ended in 1969, the dream of exploration did not die. It lived on. 6 weeks after the last Star Trek episode, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon, taking one small step for man where no man had gone before. In 2004, when Armstrong was the keynote speaker during the Beam Me Up One Last Time, Scotty convention, which was to honor James Doohan, who had gotten a star on the Walk of Fame, the moon astronaut said this: "So I'm hoping for my next command to be given a Federation starship. And when I get that command, I would like to have a crew like Captain James T. Kirk had. Spock and Chekhov and Uhura and Dr. McCoy and Sulu and the others we all remember. Now, I have a confession to make. I'm an engineer. And if I get that command, I will want a chief engineering officer like Montgomery Scott, because I know Scotty will get the job done and do it right. Even if I often hear him say, 'But Captain, I dinna have enough time.' So from one old engineer to another, thanks, Scotty." Star Trek in the beginning. I can remember the first episode as if it were yesterday, though it was over half a century ago. In the summer of 1966, there was a preview on NBC of an upcoming new fall TV series saying, "A starship the size of a city." Then on September 8th, 1966, the first episode of Star Trek premiered on NBC. It was called Man Trap, also known as the Salt Vampire episode. But it was not the first episode recorded. There were pilots. The first pilot began taping at Desilu Productions on December 12th, 1964. This pilot, named The Cage, starring Jeffrey Hunter as Captain Christopher Pike, was only seen by the public 2 years later inside a longer two-part episode in November of 1966 called Menagerie. The pilot also featured an unemotional dark-haired female named Number One, played by the actress Majel Barrett, and a rather excitable, pointed-ear half-Martian named Mr. Spock, played by Leonard Nimoy. Lucille Ball, who was head of Desilu Productions, overruled the NBC executives who wanted to kill the show based on this first pilot, and, asking for some changes, called for a second pilot. The second pilot, named Where No Man Has Gone Before, starred William Shatner as Captain James T. Kirk. Now, the network had originally told Gene Roddenberry, the creator and producer of Star Trek, following the first pilot, get rid of the woman and the guy with the pointed ears. So Roddenberry married the woman, Majel Barrett, and kept the guy with the pointed ears. Leonard Nimoy was fond of saying he would not have had it the other way around. The woman dyed her hair blonde and waited in Gene Roddenberry's reception office. So when he walked past her, he didn't even recognize her. They figured if he hadn't recognized her, NBC wouldn't. So she became the blonde Nurse Christine Chapel. The guy with the pointed ears, he became less emotional, more logical, and Vulcan green rather than Martian red. The red wouldn't videotape correctly. The series lasted for only 3 of the 5-year mission of the United Starship Enterprise, a victim of poor ratings. Ironically, the year following the show, demographics were used for the first time in TV ratings, and it was discovered that Star Trek was appealing to exactly the kind of audience that advertisers wanted. I read an article in the April 29, 1967 issue of TV Guide, written by famed science fiction author Isaac Asimov, who wrote that his adolescent daughter told him, "Mr. Spock is dreamy." He concluded, "Well, just in case, while I'm being smart, I'll also let my ears grow." The USS Enterprise. Matt Jeffries designed the iconic starship from concepts provided by Gene Roddenberry, the great bird of the galaxy, as he was known. It was initially produced at the Production Model Shop in Burbank, California. The Smithsonian Institution was presented with the original 11-foot filming model of the Enterprise on March 1st, 1974. I saw it 5 months later, before it went on display. Here's how. I was visiting Washington, D.C. while in college, and I knew that the wood and plastic model was at the Air and Space Museum, awaiting the opening of the Life in the Universe exhibit. I arrived early one morning at the museum, walked in, and said to the staff, "I'm a visiting scholar from Berkeley with a greater than average interest in Star Trek, and I'd like to see your model." Now, at the time, I was an undergraduate student, and I didn't know that a visiting scholar is usually a postdoctoral fellow. I did know that I was visiting Washington, D.C., I was a scholar, and the Star Trek parts, all of that was true. And they let me in. The exhibit was not yet finished, so I laid on my back on the floor and took tons of pictures, getting a full view of the hanging model. When I returned to Berkeley, I presented the photos to a college friend of mine, Kent Wilcox, who was also a Trek junkie. He was a budding professional plastic model builder, specializing in World War II airplanes. He built me an AMT plastic model of the ship with authentic paint chip colors from the photos that I supplied to him. Now, the paint on the filming model at the Air and Space Museum had come to the museum severely damaged. They had to call in experts to provide high-resolution photos and videos from the original series to ensure that the colors were accurate. Star Trek, its continuing mission. The show remained incredibly popular in syndication on 150 American and over 60 international TV stations. 19 years later, it spawned another TV series, Star Trek: The Next Generation. Then there was another, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, followed by Star Trek Voyager, and eventually a prequel, Enterprise. There was even an animated Saturday morning cartoon series that ran from 1973 to 1974, featuring the voices of some of the original actors. Now, there are Trekkies, Trekkers, Trekkists, and Trek junkies. I belong to the latter. I've personally seen or met all of the cast from the original Star Trek TV show and about half of the cast from Star Trek The Next Generation. Back in the 70s, when I was a student at Berkeley, the Federation Trading Post was a local store on Telegraph Avenue that featured Star Trek mementos and occasionally had the original cast members stop by for a visit. There, I caught Nichelle Nichols, who plays Lieutenant Uhura, very charming. William Shatner, who has a virtually undetectable toupee, and he was promoting his new Star Trek Live album there. Bruce Hyde, who played transporter tech Kevin Riley, was a San Francisco actor who had come across the Bay to meet us. I met James Doohan in 1976 after I was practicing a fencing exhibition on campus. As I walked out of the theater and saw James Doohan sitting on the lawn, I said to my fencing partner, "That's Jimmy Doohan." "Who is that?" he asked. I said, "That's Scotty from Star Trek." Mr. Doohan was there to do a play on campus, and we sat down on the lawn and discussed theater for over an hour. Now, I was dying to talk to him about Star Trek, but I didn't want to seem like a sniveling fan. He admitted to me that he loved theater more than anything else, but that the TV shows paid the bills at the time. Another time when I was at the Federation Trading Post at Berkeley, Franz Josef Schnaubelt, creator of the Enterprise blueprints, which were endorsed by Paramount, had just finished a new book called the Starfleet Technical Manual, and he was signing copies there. The backstory was that he had been an aerospace design engineer at General Dynamics. His daughter loved Star Trek and would ask him to explain the technical aspects of the show. So he would draw up schematics and illustrations to explain various devices to her, including medical equipment, communicator, a phaser, tricorder, and the uniforms. He showed them to Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry, who gave him access to the original props and Carpenter blueprints. When I met Franz Josef Schnaubelt, along with other fans, we pointed out to him several technical errors that he had made, which I'm sure he appreciated coming from smarty pants college kids. The Star Trek conventions. The first major Star Trek convention was held in New York City, January 1972. The first Star Trek convention that I attended was in Oakland, California, in August of 1976, and I had a long conversation with George Takei, who plays Sulu. He was very friendly and outgoing. I learned he had spent his first 2 years of college at Berkeley living in a dorm that I had once stayed in. He had completed at Berkeley his lower division studies in architecture. Then he transferred to UCLA to pursue a degree in theater. He was happy to discuss almost any subject. At a subsequent convention and various technology shows I've been to, I've chatted with Majel Barrett Roddenberry, who plays Nurse Christine Chapel. She is stunningly attractive. Will Wheaton, who plays Wesley Crusher, he's bright, he's techie. He was one of the early bloggers. Marina Sirtis, who plays Counselor Troy. She's very striking with a British accent that you don't hear on the show. And Walter Koenig, who played Chekhov in the original show, he said to me, "I have an ear for accents, and my parents are Russian immigrants." He played a Russian character on the show. And when I go to these conventions, no, I do not wear Vulcan ears. A new generation of fans had developed, and the show was now more popular than ever. A letter writing campaign succeeded in getting the first NASA space shuttle renamed to Enterprise, and a lot of the show's stars showed up at the opening of that ship. The Star Trek films. Now, don't let anyone tell you that Star Trek is a sect. No, that is not true at all. It's more like a cult. The cult requires that I always be there on the first day of the movie premieres. On December 7th, 1979, a day that will live in infamy, I was there for the first full-length movie that opened on that day, Star Trek: The Motionless Picture. Despite a plodding plot, the movie performed remarkably well, leading to several sequels. The second movie, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, was considered the best by the Star Trek faithful, featuring a return engagement of Khan Noonien Singh, played by Ricardo Montalban. He was a popular opponent from Kirk's past. A futile boycott was called when it was leaked that Spock would die in this movie. So a hasty tag-on was filmed and put at the end of the movie, hinting at the possibility of new life. By the way, here's the question I stumped the trivia expert panel with at a Star Trek convention years ago in San Francisco. See if you know the answer. In Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, at the very end of the movie, Spock was buried in a photon torpedo tube shot into space to land upon the Genesis planet. What was written on that tube? This movie was followed by the Leonard Nimoy directed Star Trek III: The Search for Spock, followed by Star Trek IV, Still Looking for Spock. No, just kidding. It was Star Trek IV: The Search for Wales. I mean, The Voyage Home. It was considered the most generally popular and successful of the movies, with plenty of humor and modern-day San Francisco as the backdrop. Now, because Leonard Nimoy had directed 2 films, William Shatner wanted a turn at directing. Star Trek V, What Were They Thinking?, came out as his first and last excursion. Even the campfire scene with the backdrop of Yosemite couldn't pull this one out of the fire. Star Trek VI, quoting lines from Hamlet or The Undiscovered Country, was the last of the classic era movies and featured Kirk's last heard line as captain of the Enterprise, a line I've been waiting for him to say for years. It's a line quoted by another flyboy hero of mine. When Chekhov asks the captain for the course, Kirk says, "Second star to the right, and straight on till morning." This was followed by the movie Star Trek Generations, a blend of the classic era and an extended Star Trek The Next Generation episode. Here we see the changing of the guard as Scotty, Chekhov, and Kirk inaugurate the Enterprise NCC 1701B. Subsequent movies feature the cast of Star Trek The Pepsi Generation series, including Star Trek First Contact, where we go back in time to meet the inventor of warp drive. It was the most financially successful of the 10 pre-reboot movies. Star Trek Insurrection followed with the Next Generation cast again, directed by Star Trek The Next Generation First Officer Jonathan Frakes as Commander Will Riker. He directed not only First Contact, but episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Discovery. The last of the classic movies was Star Trek X, Nemesis, released in 2002. It should have been subtitled Send in the Clones, but it was not enough to push the franchise further for several years. Indeed, it was the least popular and least successful financially of all the movies. In general, the even-numbered movies were better than the odd-numbered ones. The last general TV series, Star Trek Enterprise, had a relatively short life, only 4 years compared with the longer Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, or Voyager. Star Trek both reflected and pushed the limits of American culture. The original show had a recurring bridge crew with a black woman, Uhura, a fourth generation Japanese American, Sulu, a Scotsman, Montgomery Scott — all good engineers are Scots, according to Jimmy Doohan — and a young Russian, Ensign Chekhov, at a time when America was in a Cold War with the Soviet Union. But most remarkable of all was a half alien named Mr. Spock, half human, half Vulcan. In Star Trek The Next Generation, we'd see an android, Data, and in Star Trek Voyager, we'd see a software holographic doctor. Star Trek The Reboot. On May 8th, 2009, I spoke at the premiere of J.J. Abrams' vision for a Star Trek reboot with the debut of the 11th Star Trek film. In 2013, the second Star Trek reboot movie, Star Trek Into Darkness, was released. The third movie of this franchise, Star Trek Beyond, opened July 2016, just 2 months before the 50th anniversary of the original show. Star Trek Today and Beyond. Although it's been 9 years since the last Star Trek movie, rumors persist about a Star Trek IV by Paramount Pictures. There are several competing stories about where this is in development and by whom. Stay tuned. In the more recent past, Star Trek Discovery launched as a new TV series in the fall of 2018 on CBS All Access, now called Paramount Plus. Yes, it's a subscription streaming service. The USS Discovery ship was clearly an homage to concept art done by Ralph McQuarrie for an unproduced 1976 movie called Star Trek Planet of the Titans that did not see the light of day. You may know of Ralph McQuarrie for his iconic concept art for Star Wars. He drew pictures of Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. 13-show first season of Star Trek Discovery was set 10 years before the USS Enterprise's original 5-year mission. Rather than starring a captain, it featured as the primary character a black female called Number One, lieutenant commander named Michael Burnham. This was done in honor of Majel Barrett, who had that name in the original pilot. It covers an incident in Star Trek history that was mentioned but never explained. You may have noticed that the ship's name, Discovery, is identical to the one in 2001: A Space Odyssey. While it did not feature any of the lead characters from the original show, at least when it premiered, it did feature Spock's father, Sarika Vulcan, as a younger man. And you got to meet Harry Mudd. At the end of the first season, a cliffhanger emerged. Sensors detect another starship approaching the Discovery. What is it? It was the USS Enterprise. This was at a time when Christopher Pike was captain, and his first officer was a young Mr. Spock. In the second season, we meet a younger Spock, the stepbrother of the lead character, Michael Burnham. A TV movie spin-off, Star Trek Section 31, was released this year featuring Michelle Yeoh as Philippa Georgiou, a character working for a secret division of Starfleet tasked with protecting the United Federation of Planets. Following the end of the second season of Star Trek Discovery, the USS Enterprise crew, featuring Captain Pike, Number One, and Spock, spin off to create a new show called Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which has aired 3 seasons to date. Star Trek The Next Generation had a TV sequel. Patrick Stewart returned to reprise the role of Captain Jean-Luc Picard from Star Trek The Next Generation. While it was not a continuation of The Next Generation per se, it is the next chapter of the captain's life 20 years after Star Trek X Nemesis. The show's name was Picard, and it premiered in early 2020 on CBS All Access, now known as Paramount Plus. With a new cast, fans were pleased to meet Brent Spiner, who had played Data, Jerry Ryan from Voyager, who played Seven of Nine, Marina Sirtis, and Jonathan Frakes, who all made return appearances. It ran for 3 seasons. By the way, I was in London years ago and caught Patrick Stewart's one-man show of A Christmas Carol at the Old Vic Theatre. Following the show, I went around back to the stage door to see if I could get him to sign my program. But about 200 other Star Trek fans had the same idea. I only got close enough to him to breathe the same air molecules. More Star Trek? There are 2 additional animated series. CBS released Star Trek Lower Decks, an adult comedy created by Mike McMahan of Rick and Morty fame. The other is Nickelodeon's commissioning of a children's cartoon called Star Trek Prodigy. Meanwhile, Star Trek The Starfleet Academy. Beep. Meanwhile, Star Trek Starfleet Academy is a series that is currently in pre-production. Star Trek's legacy. Star Trek remains one of the most enduring and profitable franchises, as well as one of the most successful media franchises in all of American history. It spawned many TV series, including the Saturday morning animated one, a series of 10 initial movies grossing $2 billion, plus a renaissance of 3 new movies so far, the first of which earned $250 million at the box office. Star Trek has spawned countless books, comic books, games, music, street names, a space shuttle name, parodies, traveling science tours, a Las Vegas amusement experience, conventions, lunch pails, coffee cups, shower curtains, and pajamas. And yes, I do have the pajamas. Star Trek parodies. The film Galaxy Quest is a satirical take on the world of Star Trek and its fans, known as Trekkies. However, it is also so much on the nose that it doesn't seem like a satire at all. The TV series The Orville, created by and starring Star Trek fan Seth MacFarlane, is an homage to Star Trek. Star Trek tributes. Several interesting fan ventures have appeared. Notably, Star Trek Continues. It was produced, written, directed, and starred Vic Mignogna. It continues the 5-year mission and features some guest stars from the original show. For example, James Doohan's son, Chris Doohan, plays Scotty. It's worth watching, and not just for the sake of nostalgia. You can find it on YouTube. What things did Star Trek inspire in terms of technology? The invention of the StarTAC mobile flip phone by Motorola, it looked like a communicator. There was a prototype tractor beam at the University of St. Andrews. Voice-activated computing like Siri, Alexa, and Google's ubiquitous computing. Scanadu is a medical tricorder. Matter replication is seen in its early phases in 3D printing. Aluminum oxynitrate is transparent aluminum. Cisco's telepresence is a hyperform of high-definition telecommunication. It's used across multiple locations. I have lots of Star Trek stories. What are some of yours? Thank you for listening. I'm Bill Petro, your friendly neighborhood historian. You can find more details on this topic and others on my website at billpetro.com.